He died with $8 million in the bank. He also died wearing a coat held together with safety pins. His name was Ronald Reed. He pumped gas for 25 years. He swept floors at JCPenney for 17 more. Nobody who knew him saw it coming. Not his neighbors, not his stepchildren, not even the bank teller who cashed his checks for decades. When he passed away in 2014, the town figured there would be nothing to settle, maybe a few $1,000s, maybe a used truck. Instead, lawyers found a stack of stock certificates in a safe deposit box. Coca-Cola, Procter & Gamble, General Electric. Decades of dividends, reinvested, untouched, $8 million. From a man who used safety pins instead of buying a new coat. And here's the part that should make you uncomfortable. We've been told the opposite story our whole lives. Spend on yourself. You deserve it. Buy the new car, lease the bigger apartment, post the vacation. Look rich, and eventually you'll become rich. Ronald Reed never got that memo. And he died wealthier than almost every person who ever mocked him for driving a beat-up car. Today, we're going inside the real, documented lives of people who had enormous money and chose, on purpose, to live like they didn't. Not because they were cheap, not because they were sad, because they understood something about money that most people never figure out. This is Rich Mode. Stick around, because case number 2 is even stranger than Ronald Reed. Let's go back further than Ronald Reed, because his story isn't even close to the most extreme. In a small town in Lake Forest, Illinois, there lived a woman named Grace Groner. Her neighbors knew her as the lady who walked everywhere because she never owned a car. She wore donated clothes from a church rummage sale. She lived in a one-bedroom house she'd had since the 1930s. She worked her entire career as a secretary at Abbott Laboratories. In 1935, she bought 3 shares of her company's stock, just 3. It cost her about $180. She never sold a single share. She reinvested every dividend, every stock split, every single year for the next 75 years. When Grace Groner died in 2010 at age 100, those 3 shares had become $7 million. She left almost all of it to her old college. A scholarship fund that still exists today, funded entirely by a secretary who never owned a car. Now here's where most people get the lesson wrong. They hear these stories and think, okay, so being poor and saving is the secret. That's not it. That's actually the trap. Ronald Reed and Grace Groner weren't poor. They had completely ordinary incomes. The secret wasn't earning less. It was that their spending never grew to match what they had. Psychologists actually have a name for the disease that destroys most people's wealth. It's called lifestyle creep. Every time your income goes up, your spending quietly follows it. New job, nicer apartment. Raise at work, nicer car. Bonus check, bigger vacation. You never feel rich because you were never actually keeping any of it. You were just upgrading the treadmill while staying in exactly the same spot. Ronald Reed and Grace Groner broke that pattern completely. Their income from working stayed modest their whole lives. But because their spending never rose to meet it, the gap between the two went somewhere. Into shares. Into compounding. Into decades of silence that eventually became millions. But this isn't only a story about secretaries and gas station workers. It also happens at levels of wealth that should sound impossible. Let's talk about the man who built one of the largest fortunes in retail history. Ingvar Kamprad founded IKEA. At his peak, multiple rankings placed him among the richest people alive, with a fortune that at various points was estimated north of $20 billion. He flew economy class, not occasionally, as a rule. He drove the same old Volvo for decades. He furnished his own home with IKEA furniture, the same furniture anyone watching this video could order tonight. He was known to haggle over prices in markets the way someone budgeting groceries would, not the way a billionaire would. When journalists asked him directly why, given everything he had, his answer was almost always the same idea, repeated in different words. If IKEA-owned founder started living like a luxury brand, the company would stop being IKEA. Think about how unusual that is. Most people get rich and then spend the rest of their life trying to look the part. Kamprad got richer than almost anyone on earth and refused to look the part on purpose. He treated frugality the same way an athlete treats training. Not a punishment, a discipline that protected the thing he'd actually built his life around. Now let's go even bigger, because there's a version of this story involving a man worth tens of billions who deliberately tried to give almost all of it away before he died, and stay private about most of it while he was alive. Chuck Feeney co-founded Duty Free Shoppers, the airport retail chain. At his wealthiest, his fortune was estimated in the billions. For years, almost nobody outside his closest circle knew he was rich at all. He flew coach. He didn't own a house. At one point, reporters described him carrying his belongings in a plastic shopping bag, wearing a $15 watch. He once told an interviewer that he simply found it more satisfying to know money was working somewhere useful than sitting in an account with his name on it. By the time he died in 2020, Chuck Feeney had given away almost his entire fortune, more than $8 billion, to hospitals, universities, and public health programs across multiple continents. He didn't wait for his will to do it. He gave it away while he was alive, on purpose, specifically so he could see what it accomplished. Bill Gates has publicly called Feeney's approach to giving the ultimate example for the rest of the billionaire class to follow. A man worth billions who chose to die with close to nothing left, by design? So now we have 4 completely different lives: a gas station attendant, a secretary, a furniture billionaire, a duty-free tycoon. Different decades, different industries, different countries even. And every single one of them made the exact same decision when the money arrived. They refused to let their spending catch up to it. Here, where it gets interesting, because there's actual research behind why this works, and why most people do the opposite, without even noticing. Researchers who study lottery winners and people who receive sudden inheritances have found something almost every time. A huge share of people who suddenly receive large amounts of money are functionally broke again within just a few years. Not because the money wasn't enough, because their spending expanded to fill whatever amount showed up, no matter how large that amount was. Meanwhile, people like Ronald Reed, who never had a single windfall in his life, quietly out-earned most lottery winners just by refusing to let his expenses grow. This is the part nobody puts on a vision board. Getting rich is mostly about income and luck. Staying rich, generation after generation, is almost entirely about restraint. And restraint doesn't get likes on social media. A guy in a $15 watch giving away $8 billion doesn't trend the way a rented Lamborghini in front of a rented mansion does. So the algorithm shows you the wrong models. It shows you people performing wealth, and hides the people who actually built it and kept it. That's the uncomfortable twist hiding inside every one of these stories. The people who look the least rich were very often the ones who were the most financially free. And the people who look the richest on your phone screen right now, the influencer in the rented supercar, the guy in the photo in front of a private jet he chartered for 20 minutes, they are very often the closest to broke. Because looking rich and being rich pull money in exactly opposite directions. One spends it outward, to be seen, the other keeps it working quietly, where nobody is watching. So if you're sitting there thinking none of this applies because you're not a secretary in 1935 or a billionaire with a private jet, here's the actual lesson underneath all 4 stories. It was never about the amount of money any of these people had. It was about the gap they protected between what they earned and what they spent. That gap is the only thing that ever turns into wealth. You can start that gap with $20 a week. Ronald Reed did it with a gas station paycheck. The mechanism doesn't care how much money you start with. It only cares whether you let it grow undisturbed. 3 people in this video died with fortunes nobody saw coming. One person gave his away faster than he made it, on purpose, and still ended up one of the most respected billionaires in history. None of them needed a 6-figure salary to start. They needed patience, and the discipline to stay invisible while the gap did its work. So next time you see someone driving an old car or wearing the same jacket for 10 years, don't assume you know what's in their bank account. You might be looking at the next Ronald Reed. If this changed how you think about money even a little, subscribe to Rich Mode. Every week we dig up the real, documented financial stories nobody else is telling. Drop a comment with which one of these 4 surprised you the most. I read every single one.